Years ago, I began to witness without any knowledge of strategies. I was 14 years old when I knocked on the first door to witness to a Muslim near my hometown of Rahbi in the north areas east of Tripoli in Lebanon. Nobody taught me anything. I just did it by doing it. There were a group of 4 young men who came from Operation Mobilization from Europe, coming through the Middle East, and they found wonderful fruit in Lebanon, especially the freedom. They're able to go door to door. And later on, I began to go to Europe and do the same thing. I found more receptivity in Lebanon than in France or Belgium or what's the other country that speaks French? Switzerland, and also England, and went through those countries. And I would knock on the door and say, I'm not interested, I'm not interested. But the Lebanese hospitality welcomes strangers. So it was wonderful. And that's when I discovered that there are a lot more people open to the gospel than I had thought. I never thought Muslims would want to consider the claims of Christ. There's so much prejudice and the wars among them and so on. So later on, as I grew up in age and more in experience and began to be exposed to the world, I began travel to Europe at the age of 18. Every summer I dedicated to missions. So I was going on mission trips in the summer. Since I was 14 within Lebanon, and then since I was 18 outside Lebanon. And after graduating, I began to go even further. By the time I was 26, I had covered 75 countries. So I don't know why God put it in my blood to be on the plane all the time. I have considered many times actually buying an airplane instead of a house. But I think it's more expensive than a house. So I began to be exposed to many different methods. And some say this is the only way. Some say this is the only way. I confronted many people with objections to Christianity, both by Muslims and non-Muslims, as I traveled. I've come in touch with Hindus and Buddhists and Sikhs, and in Kurdistan by Yazidis, and in Lebanon, Jehovah's Witnesses, and even in the 60s there were cults arriving into Lebanon. One of them is the Moonies. I remember in 68 I met the Mooney missionaries in Beirut. And this building here was owned by the Moonies. It was a headquarters for training Mooney missionaries. And there were 300 Koreans living in this building when we bought it. They had left and then we bought it from them. So I put all these things together in this short talk. What are the various missiological approaches that are out there? And if there's one that I missed, please tell me about it, because I'd like to add it to this talk. 6 of them, and these have fancy names. Took me a while to come up with fancy words. Polemic, apologetic, irenic, contextual, creative access, and charismatic. Do you understand all these words?
No.
If you don't, you will soon. Polemic comes from the Greek word polemikos via Latin. So you know the Latins and the Greeks kind of lived together for centuries under the Roman Empire. And so there's an influence of Latin into Greek. But polemics basically means to defeat the opposition, to confront, to attack. Actually, it's a war word. Polemic means to go and attack the other one and defeat them. So the purpose is defeat them. In ministry to Muslims, what does that mean? It means to tell them how bad Muhammad was, right? The Quran is corrupt. Islamic history is filled with blood. What else would you say? Your concept of God is incorrect, and it doesn't match His majesty and glory, which you claim. And to show them the Muslim lifestyle. Some people tell them, look at the Muslim countries, they're poor, they don't do well, women are oppressed, and so on. So that is the polemic approach. Do you know any people who use the polemic approach? Who? People you know.
Ray Comfort.
Ray Comfort. Who else?
Elijah.
Elijah is quite confrontive. Over the years, I have softened him a bit, and I had a couple talks with him while he was here, because he can do better without that. But there are some who are really good in confrontation, like Jay Smith. Have you heard of Jay Smith? Jay Smith spent 25 years in London, going every Sunday to Hyde Park, Speaker's Corner. Actually takes a ladder and stands on the ladder and shouts the gospel and attacks Muslims. And it started when he did not know anything about Islam, and he saw an imam standing there attacking Christianity. So he went home, started doing his homework, and he'd come back and shout back at him. And now they have two ladders shouting at each other. He's been threatened many times. He was close to being beaten. I don't know if he was, but I know some of his videos show they're pounding on him. And that's happened to me too, so I can feel it when I see it. And so he now has a big team. He brings together, and he's trained people. He has a training in polemics. He calls it apologetics, but it's really polemics. Just now moving back to the United States. So he'll be doing ministry here. And a couple of years ago, he came to this building and taught a course on polemics and apologetics. So one other guy very well known is Father Zakaria. He's on Hayat TV attacking Islam. We have Rashid from Morocco. We have Wahid. We have Jabbar. We have so many people on 22 Arab channels. Most of them are attacking Islam. So the attack has penetrated the skylines, gone down through cyberspace into living rooms and bedrooms and offices of people who are watching Hayat TV. Amazingly, as I visit Muslims, I see the TV running, and it's Hayat TV. Most of it's Hayat TV. Some have other TV stations. There are close to 30 Christian Arab TV stations. 20 of them are polemic, and the others are more the other things. Attack, 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 attack. There's a death threat on many of these anchor people who have great programs. They open the Quran, they read from the Quran, they say the problems with the Quran. They also preach the gospel through that, but that's their approach. Is it biblical to attack? Is it? How many of you say yes? How many of you say no? How many of you are not sure? You're not sure. Well, I will. After I go through these, I'm gonna. Maybe I should actually do it now and come back later. There is something called. Oh no, I don't have them here, but it's in your notes. You look in your notes, and you'll see that Jesus did polemics. Didn't Jesus do polemics? Yep. Yeah. What did he do? Who did he talk to? Who did he attack? The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the teachers of the law, and the scribes. And he attacked them, I think, even more viciously than any of the people that I have just told you about. Really? Like he would say, I have never said to a Muslim, your God is the devil. Jesus said that. He said, your father is the devil. They said to him, our father is God. Where is that? In John chapter 8, verses 31 to the end of the chapter. It's all polemic. Arguing with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And the interesting thing, in verse 31, he says, to the Jews who believed in him, he said. They believed in him. Apparently they had an intellectual agreement with him on what he was teaching, but they didn't get it. So he started really pricking them so they can understand. Because some of the things Jesus said, everybody will agree with. And when he talks about God, and we don't have all the teachings of Jesus recorded in the scripture. It's a summary. It says he taught them. We know the Sermon on the Mount. We know some other discourses. John 13 to 21 is a beautiful, several chapters on teaching his disciples and so on. So we have a lot of teachings of Jesus. And many of them the Pharisees wouldn't have a problem with. So when you speak to a religious person, they say, yeah, we agree. But you know in your heart they don't get it. You have to do something. You have to waken them with a prick. And when Peter stood up to preach on the day of Pentecost, he was quite polemic. Even though he mentioned the history, and also Stephen mentioned the history of the Bible from Old Testament and so on. But what did he say that was polemic? He says, you killed him. You killed the anointed one. What? You're accusing us of killing him? You killed him. And so that's pretty harsh. And he also told them they're whitewashed tombs. They look white and beautiful on the outside, but they stink on the inside. Tell them if you wash the pot from the outside, it will be clean on the inside, but inside it's pretty dirty. And on and on. So there's some scriptures here that will show you the various incidents when Jesus was quite polemic. Called them hypocrites. He called them blind fools. So did Paul use polemics? Was Paul polemic? Are you following my notes? 2.1. Paul in 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So demolish, that's another word for polemic. Polemic is to demolish the opposition. Now there are some negative things for that. If you want to use polemics, you need to be aware of the repercussions. They tried to seize him and kill him. There are many fatwas against some of these people that we're talking about today. And if the Muslims could get their hand on them, they would kill them. And we know some people have been killed. Offends people. Matthew 15 and John 8 says they were offended, they were hurt, they got mad, they got angry. And they even attacked back and called them demon-possessed. I've been called that too. Not to equate myself with Jesus, but Jesus told us how they treated me, they'll treat you. So if you are ready for those negative repercussions, go ahead and use polemics. Positive. What are some positive things that happened from the polemics? In fact, some people actually believed when they heard Jesus attack the Pharisees. Most of them were not the Pharisees themselves, but the crowds. The crowds who heard They saw the confrontation between Jesus and them. That's particularly why I accept to do debates. I'm not concerned about, of course, I would love to see the Imam come to Christ, but usually they don't. And God has to deal with them through dreams and visions, and He's done that to many. But my role is for the crowds that come. Some of the debates I've had have hundreds of people come, Muslims, to hear the debate. And I take advantage of that time to preach the gospel. But there is a confrontation element to that as well. The risk, there are some things here, risks and benefits. Now let's look at the polemic qualities of a polemic teacher. If you are a polemic teacher, first thing you need to know is that you need to know what you're talking about. If you're going to quote the Quran and show how bad it is, you really need to know the Quran. And you need to be convinced. Not that you read it in a book on chapter 6, page 564, that you read a verse, and then you come and quote it. You don't know the context of it. You don't know the history of it. You don't know what a Muslim would say back to you if you say something like that. So basically, if you feel called to be polemic, you have to be a scholar. You have to really understand Islam, its history, the things you're talking about. You need to be confident in and be very persuasive. Otherwise, you're not effective and you actually do more damage to the cause than help. Anyone here called to be a polemic preacher or teacher? All right, then let's move to apologetics.
I have a question.
Yes.
It seems like the examples that you use from Scripture aren't about the content of Judaism as much as the character of those religious leaders.
Oh, definitely, yes.
So can polemics be used in that way to point out the hypocrisy of the life of Muslims?
You can, of course, definitely. But
Jesus
Jesus did not have a problem with the law. He had a problem with their misapplication of the law and misuse of the law and abusing the law to their own benefits, purposes. And they have actually changed the law in some ways. For example, he told them that you tell your parents, we don't need to support you anymore because there's a law that if we support the temple, we don't have to support our parents. And he told them that's wrong. So their own teaching, he said, you created your own traditions. God did not have a problem. But we have a problem with the content of Islam. That's where the difference is between Judaism. But the point is, there is a polemic benefit. There is an application of polemic in certain situations. Jesus wasn't only polemic, but he was polemic. Paul, the same. The second approach is apologetic. Now, strange, the word apology means not to apologize, but to defend. But because it comes from Greek, apologetikos, to speak in defense. Apologetics is a study. You can get a PhD in apologetics. I don't know if anybody claims that you can get a degree in polemics. And the reason for that is polemics is usually thrown in with apologetics. And I separated them for a purpose. And my purpose is to show the benefits of apologetics over polemics. You can do the same thing that a polemic does, but in a more apologetic way rather than an attack. Purpose is to give reasoned defense of the faith. Did Jesus use apologetics? On page 2, you will see that Jesus spoke with Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman. There is a little bit mixture between polemics and apologetics with the Samaritan woman. But with Nicodemus, he was not attacking. He just said to him, you will not inherit the kingdom of God unless you're born again. But he did not attack his beliefs or his understanding of faith. But with the Samaritan woman, he did both. He said, the truth is in the Jews, not with you. But then there will come a day when God will be worshipped not here or there, but in spirit and truth. Jesus defended his sonship when he was questioned. Jesus defends eating with the tax collectors and sinners when he was attacked. Jesus defends his disciples when they were attacked. Like they told him, your disciples are eating wheat on the Sabbath. And then Jesus defends the healing on the Sabbath, his own healing on the Sabbath. Paul also uses apologetics in Thessalonica and Berea, and Acts 17 is an apologetic, but there is a mixture with polemics. The only reason I separate the two is that you will know that you can be on the defensive without having to attack, and occasionally I use polemics in my defense. Negative and positive are similar to polemics. Because of shortage of time, I'll move to the next point. Irenic. Have you heard of the word Irenic? Do you know the name Irene or Irena? Means peaceful. Peaceful approach. Now there is an approach. In fact, I have a book in my office with the title Peaceable Approach to Muslims. And there are people who are specialists in peaceful dialogue with Muslims. There are many who don't attack. They just meet with Muslims, and Muslims will say their thing, and they will say their thing, and nobody is trying to convert the other one. One of these people, John something, I forgot his name now, he wrote a book on dialogue between Muslim and Christians, and there's quite a few in the library. Not as many as polemics and apologetics, but there are, excuse me, there are a few books that speak about dialogue with Muslims. Dialogue was also a movement that came out of the World Council of Churches that in the 50s. And I was in college at the late 60s, and I was exposed to that. And there were some pastors who felt their ministry is to do dialogue with Muslims. And so they would hold forums, dialogues, where a Muslim speaker would speak about Islam and a Christian about Christianity. And so some people claim that they're effective because they get an opportunity to share their faith in a peaceable atmosphere. Carl Medeiros does dialogue like that, and I forgot that name of the guy that is very well known. He goes around the world and does dialogue with the Muslims. I personally have not found fruit in modern day to either polemics or Irenics. I've not seen fruit. Even those who I know very well, and I ask them, can you honestly tell me, have you led any people to Christ? They say, I don't know any, but theoretically, yes. Theoretically. What does the theory say? And I know a number of people who gave testimonies how they became a Christian is that they watched a TV program, there was an attack on Islam and made them think and so on. So even though we don't see the fruit of it, it sort of tears down the arguments for Muslims, and instead of being on the offenses themselves, they become defensive. And many of them actually become convinced that Islam is not the answer after they finally open their eyes to the problems in their own religion. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? But I need to tell you that there's an Irenic approach. Of the three approaches, I think the apologetic approach makes a lot of sense, because you're not attacking, you're not just letting people share and without you persuading them. Apologetics is all about persuasion, and explaining the gospel in a way that would help those who are having problems with the Trinity, with the sonship of Jesus, with the death of Jesus, that you have a reasoned defense and explain the gospel clearly to them. So of the three approaches, I would choose apologetics. Now, I don't know how many of you feel called to do any of these three things. Anybody want just do Irenics? Peaceful, sit around and just discuss. And I cannot do it. My nature cannot allow that, because even though I am, I'll tell you what I am later. Actually, in the notes, I have charismatic number 4. And in here, I have it as number 6. So I want to leave it to 6. Let's look at the contextual approaches. We've talked a lot about contextualization. I'm not going to go in detail, but look in your page 5. There are 4 main texts from the Bible which justify contextualization and inside a movement. Acts 15. What happens in Acts 15? When Paul and Barnabas were exposed to a problem in Antioch, that some Judaizers who believed that Greeks must become Jews before they become Christians were coming down to Antioch from Jerusalem and saying, hey, you're in the wrong. You need to circumcise, you need to become Jewish, you need to follow the Mosaic law, and then accept Jesus Christ. The way we did. We were Jews, we became Christians. You need to go through that route. And contextualists use that as the reason why they believe that Muslims should not go to Christianity first. They need to go directly to God. But the analogy is wrong there, because as we said when I answered Curtis, is that you have problem with the Islamic content. You don't have problem with the biblical content of the Jewish faith. And so you cannot go directly like that without knowing Jesus first. So anyway, when Paul and Barnabas went to the church of the in Jerusalem, were the main 3 leaders of the church, who were the 3 disciples of Jesus who he spent a lot of time with. Who are they? Peter, James, and John. They all spoke, and Acts 15 says, no, they don't have to be circumcised. They don't have to become Jewish. They were lost, we were lost. We were Jews lost, Greeks lost. Both of us need grace. We need to be saved by grace. And that's very, very clear. My response to the contextualists who take this too far is that the subject was really limited to circumcision and following the law of Moses. It was not about culture. It was very theological. So theologically, there's an Old Testament, old law, and there's a new law. Old covenant, there's a new covenant. Under the new covenant, we don't need to be circumcised anymore. Although he said it's okay to circumcise. Circumcision or no circumcision does not matter very much. Jonathan Swift will be addressing these 4 texts this week in more detail. And I have articles in Biblical Missiology on all these 4. Actually here I have only 2. I didn't mention 1 Corinthians and so on. Acts 17, mentioned in contextualization, building bridges and common ground. Acts 17, when Paul came to the Areopagus, which is Mars Hill in Athens, there were Athenians who were discussing philosophy, and it says that they have nothing to do except sit there and chat and talk about the latest ideas. So when they heard that there's this new teacher coming in, teaching some strange things, and teaching about some foreign gods, they understood when he was speaking about Jesus, And the apostles said, these are gods that they weren't aware of. Now let's bring him in, tell us about these new gods. So while he was walking around, he saw a lot of temples, and one of them he saw, it says, the unknown God. So when the time came for him to address and give them the lecture, he said, hey, I see that you're very religious. Actually, the word for religious in Greek is that you are superstitious. You follow a lot of superstition. But those who are favorable to the contextualization theory translated more like the word religious, which is a sense of religion, superstitious religion, or mystical. And then he addressed the unknown God. He said, the God you do not know, I preach about. He wasn't affirming the unknown God, but he's giving them the answer that they do not know. He said, the one you worship in ignorance, the word unknown and ignorance are the same word in Greek. The word agnostic comes from that. Knowledge is gnostos, gnost. Ag means not, gnostic, not knowledge, not known, translated into ignorance. The one you're ignorant of or you have not known, I will tell you about. He is the God of heaven and earth, the creator. From one man he created all people and assigned them places and so on. That's in Acts 17, verse 25. And he says, he did this so that they may seek him and find him, though he is not far from us, as one of your poets has said. Now that little quote from a poem from the Greeks caused the contextualists to quote the whole Quran. It's okay to quote a verse and tell them, your book says, it's okay, we've said that a lot of times last week, but it's not okay to accept the whole body of literature of the Greek mythology, which Paul did not accept. He did not consider it a bridge. And so we made too much out of it. It was just a mere quote, call it by its name. A mere quote that supports his argument in a way that Elijah told us last week. You can quote the Quran in a way that supports the Bible, supports your argument. And I oppose the idea of authenticating the Bible through the Quran. So there's a difference there. Be careful how you think. We're not quoting the Quran as a truth. We're saying your own Quran, which I don't believe in, tells you to read the Bible. Why aren't you reading the Bible? And the Bible is the truth, the Quran is not. That should be clear when you give that message. But don't deceive them to thinking that you believe the Quran is telling the truth. So this is the contextualization approach, and we, one big application of it we talked about is Bible translation. That when I first exposed to that was 1974, way back then. It's not a new idea. I was told by the teachers, the linguists who were training me to be a Bible translator, that you cannot translate the Lamb of God, which comes from a Jewish context where they have lambs, in Africa where they have pigs or they have cows, like this Maasai people in Kenya, they have cows, right? Have you been to the Maasai tribes? I have. Taken pictures with these long ears and so on. They have cows and they drink the blood and urine of a cow as something very healthy. That's what I learned, at least. And so one of the Wycliffe scholars who did a study there, he says, you can call Jesus the calf of God. He doesn't have to be the Lamb of God. And another teacher said, in another society where they have pigs and they don't know about sheep, why don't you call him the piglet of God? And at that time, I got so upset, and I said, what in the world is this guy talking about? If Jesus is the piglet of God, then what happens to the prodigal son when he goes to the pigs? Should we call them lambs? Should we call them camels? Why don't you tell the truth? The Bible was written in context of Judaism, in the Hebrew language, and it has to tell the story as it really happened. Now, if you want to explain it and you say that lambs were important like you think pigs are important, you can say whatever you want, but don't change the text of the Bible. And so all these theories have brought us to this point where now Son of God is not Son of God anymore, is become beloved of God, or viceroy of God, or representative of heaven, or the spiritual son that comes from heaven, and all kinds of things. So these approaches, I don't see, even though there is some kind of a biblical support for it, it doesn't come out of the Bible, and it's inconsistent with the normative teaching of the Bible. So creative access, number 5. I was a chairman of a committee in the creative access in the early 90s when the AD 2000 movement started. Have you heard of the AD 2000? Or the Y2K phenomenon, where in the year 2000 the world is going to come to an end. All the computers in the world will fall apart. The clocks will be just completely damaged, and we won't have any food. The world is going to come to an end. Jesus is coming. Have you heard about that? I never believed it. I did not change my lifestyle. I didn't buy any of these $5,000 packages that gives me 3 months supply of food, dried food and canned food that were created for that kind of thing. But there was that 20, 30 years before that, there was that preparation for the Y2K. And it didn't become really hot until the last 10 years. And the AD 2000 movement, led by Louis Bush, who's a wonderful missionary, and he's still involved in missions across culture around the world as a leader within the Lausanne movement at first, and then spun off to this creative, it's called the AD 2000 movement. By the way, when we were coming close to the year 2000, they called it 2000 and beyond. And it lasted till 2010, and then it disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore. So I was chairman of the Creative Access Committee, and David Garrison was coordinator with me, co-chairman with that committee. I lasted 2 years with this committee, but we sent tens of thousands of missionaries to the Muslim world to do business as mission. It was a new idea. It was called before tent makers. Christy Wilson, the one who inspired Barbara to get involved in Muslim ministry. Christy Wilson was professor at Gordon Conwell University, a missionary, long-standing veteran missionary to Afghanistan and Iran, Afghanistan mostly. He came up with the idea of tent making. He says, Paul was a tent maker. Why do we have full-time missionaries? We need tent makers. We need people to go work as teachers and doctors and nurses and businesses and all so on. And that developed to the creative access. Creative access refers to the countries that we don't have access to because we cannot have a missionary visa. Now, missionary visa used to be a category early on, where you actually go from America as a missionary to India, and on your visa it says missionary. And that no longer was possible in many countries after many of the colonies became independent. When it was under the British and the French colonies, that was possible and was encouraged to have a missionary visa. There were priests and nurses and monks and nuns and pastors and preachers, evangelists, disciplers, trainers, theologians, and so on, going with a missionary visa. That doesn't exist anymore now. We don't have a missionary visa. So to replace it, we said, let's have business as a creative access, a creative way of becoming a missionary without being called a missionary. About 50,000 are now in Saudi Arabia alone who are creative access missionaries, but they're not missionaries. And what we've discovered, one reason I left that movement, is I discovered many of them feel paralyzed. They cannot do any missions. They went to do business as mission. They ended up doing business with no mission. And the argument, which is very typical, to the guy, I tried to give him 10 Bibles and others. They say, so if we become open about our faith, we'll lose our visa, our creative access visa to come as business. So why are you worried about losing the visa? Because we need a witness. We need a witness. Well, so you don't witness so that you don't kicked out because you want to witness. So you don't witness so you don't get kicked out because you want to witness. It became a vicious circle. So out of that came a few ideas. Am I boring you yet? No. You're not bored yet. Listen to some of these strategies that came out of that problem, where creative access became creative, but it was not missions anymore. We started calling presence evangelism. Presence evangelism. Have you heard of that? Presence missions. Now, you seem to be rookies in missions. I'm an old-fashioned, I've gone through a lot of these things. Presence means I'd rather have Christians in Saudi Arabia say nothing about Jesus than not have any Christians there. I say, well, I'd rather have no Christians there than having Christians who are silent about their faith. And then lifestyle evangelism came up. You've heard of that. The books written on lifestyle. Well, you know you evangelize by your lifestyle. And they used Francis of Assisi. Somebody check whether he did say that or not. I thought I'd checked it, and he did say that. But if it's not him, someone else said, preach the word all the time, and if necessary, use words. And the idea was that in your life, you can lifestyle, you can live out the Christian faith, and that speaks louder than words. Which is true to some extent. But if you never say anything, like this guy named Bob in Iraq, I stayed with him in his house for 12 days. And I noticed he does not mention the name Jesus. He doesn't have Bibles. He doesn't tell people about Jesus. But he speaks about Allah, Allah, Allah. So I said, Bob, don't you ever speak about Jesus? And the area had opened up to the gospel. I had just been working for years on a Bible translation in Kurdish. Now we printed the Gospel of Luke before the whole New Testament was finished. We did just at least one gospel. And we had 100,000 distributed, and we did another 100,000, another 100,000. It was amazing. We were able to distribute. And how come you don't do that? He says, well, they know I'm a Christian. I said, well, how would they know you're a Christian? He said, well, I'm an American. They know I'm a Christian. I said, no, my friend. And I gave him my spiel. He turned around and became one of the most effective missionaries there, and began to distribute scripture. But he had a paradigm shift in his mind from just lifestyle evangelism, let them just see me, see my life, and then somehow they become saved. I don't know how it happens. So that is in a humanitarian aid, huge movement of people becoming doctors and engineers and working as teachers. ELIC, a wonderful organization. I do training for them. English Language Institute. Have 700 teachers in Asia, between China and many, even Cambodia, North Korea, South Korea, all over the place. And I've heard wonderful testimonies of them sharing the gospel. But the movement has become massive, where there are more missionaries in the creative access than actually in the traditional missionary sense. Because you can't go to some places as a missionary or as a tourist even. You have to have a business visa. Now, I am not against any of that, as long as you don't forget who you are. Don't forget the real reason that you're going to these countries and make an impact for the gospel. And if you get kicked out, that's fine. once when actually I met Barbara for the second time, met her in Austin at her church, and then all of a sudden here she shows up in Marrakesh, Morocco, about 15, 20 years ago. And we had a big conference. 400 missionaries from around the world came under the what's called Bless Morocco year. It was a year to bless Morocco. So in the middle of that year, Bless Morocco was to bless Morocco by praying for Morocco. So we had a prayer conference in Marrakesh, and the mayor of Marrakesh came and welcomed us to the country to pray for his country. And we had the flag of Morocco in the big fancy hotel, $200 per night hotel. I'm a cheapy guy. I went and got a pension, a little, what do you call pension in English? A foyer or hostel for $20. And I walked, had my exercise to that place, and I could stay there 10 days for one night of these people. It was a 4-night meeting, but the whole event was a week long, because after that we were going to go in vans and travel throughout the country. It was maps. This van goes through this route, this van goes through that. For 400 people rented these 12-passenger vans that were traveling all over the country to bless Morocco. And after the mayor walked, and I was one of those who welcomed him and walked out with him, said goodbye, put him in his entourage, and he left. We came back, and there was Graham, what's his name, who sings, his British guy? Huh? Graham something, a singer, famous singer. David Graham or something, I don't remember his name. He was leading worship. It was an amazing 4 days of worship and prayer and violently taking on, storming the heaven, you know. But there were some problems. The first problem, after the mayor leaves, the coordinator of this conference stands up and lifts his hands like this, says, "We are here to pray for Morocco, to bless Morocco. We're going to go walk all over Morocco. We're going to put our hands on their buildings, on their businesses, on their cars, on their houses, on their doors, and pray for them. But remember, you're not allowed to distribute scriptures or witness to anybody. We're here just to pray." This is called the prayer walk movement. You know the prayer walk movement. Go around the world and pray. Pray for people. Go to Turkey. Every village has been prayed for many times. People go, we probably spend $2-3 million on this conference. If you add up the food and the housing and the cars, rentals and the trip costs and vacation after that, whatever gifts you buy from the market, some jewelry worth $10, some people paid $300 for it because they thought it was authentic, but it's just fake and stuff like that. If you add all this money, my goodness, I wish they had given me all this money and stayed home and pray. You can pray from home. Honestly, you can sit at home and pray for the world, and you never have to pay a penny. You can pray while you're eating the nice, you know, food that your mother cooked or your wife cooked, or you cook, whatever. Anyway, when this guy raised his hand and says, "We're not here to witness," it's like a stab in my heart. I said, 400 people here in Morocco could make a huge difference. And this is what I would do if I were coordinating it. I would say, okay, let's get some trouble. Let's get in trouble. Let's get out. And as wisely as you can, share the gospel. Here, each one of you take 10 New Testaments and spend 2-3 hours in the streets in the break and hand out gospels to people. Share the gospel with them, love them, pray with them. And if you get arrested, wow, that'd be great. It'll make the news. Oh, yeah. And all of the countries of your countries will be working on releasing you from jail. And it'll be in the news all over the world. That'd be a lot more effective than spending 4 days praying for people we have no intention of witnessing to. So you get the point I'm making? So creative access is good, but it's not good without the gospel. Now we come to the real issue, kerygma. Kerygmatic comes from the word keruso. It's a declension, meaning a way of transforming a word to look different, but it's the same. You can notice the K-E-R are the same. Kerygma and keruso are from the same verb. And it means to proclaim. Proclamation, go back now to number 4 in the pages. Proclamation is actually what Jesus came for. What did Jesus say? One of the first things he revealed to the people in the synagogue. He quoted Isaiah 61. And he read, actually, Isaiah 61, where it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for I have come to give good news to the poor, and to relieve the captives, and to set the captives free," and so on. And he said, today this prophecy was fulfilled. I am he. They took him, they wanted to kill him, throw him off the edge. But Jesus came to proclaim the gospel. That is, even though he did polemics, he did apologetics, he did irenics, and Paul, not Jesus, did, actually they did some fishing, but I don't know if I think they sold it. Probably Jesus sat next to Peter while he was selling the fish on the beach, I don't know. But anyway, the main ministry of Jesus was kerygmatic, proclamation, preaching the gospel. I have a full study, which is in your notes. Let me see where I could guide you to, which says study of the word gospel in the New Testament. Where is the table of contents? If you look in the table of contents, you'll find a study where it tells you how many times, 110 times, the word gospel is used, 40 times used with the word keruso. Evangelion and keruso coming together, preaching the gospel, meaning to proclaim the gospel. Proclamation is heralding, is shouting, is telling, is informing, it's witnessing. All these words mean to let as many people as possible know about the gospel. This is our mandate. Now comes the most important sentence you would want to write. Although Jesus used all of these forms, the only one he told us, he ordered us to do is kerygmatic. He didn't say attack people, or apologize, or do irenics with them, or creative access. The only thing we find in the 4 Gospels that is direct teaching and command of Jesus is to preach the gospel. The same thing with Paul. He was talking that his mandate is to preach the gospel. In 1 Corinthians 1:16, he says, I was not sent to baptize, but to preach. He informed us. So the kerygmatic method is really the only one that we are obligated to do, and the other things you have to pray about, see if the Lord would use you. And most probably you're going to use a little bit of each one of these methods. But remember, the core of your calling is to share the gospel with the lost, to shed the light on the darkness, to give hope to the hopeless, to set the captives free, to those who are blind that they may see, those who are deaf that they may hear, those who have stone hearts, they would have hearts of flesh. This is what we are about. Let's not be distracted by all the good things we do, whether it's medical or any kind of humanitarian aid, building houses, shelters. There are ministries with the word shelter. It means they want to build shelters for the poor. Jesus did tell us in Matthew 25, at the end of the chapter, I believe from verse 50 on, he says that if you did not do these to one of these little ones, you did not do it to me. What is that? I was hungry, you did not feed me. I was thirsty, you did not give me to drink. I was a prisoner, you didn't visit me. I was sick, you did not care for me. And I was naked, you did not clothe me. So he did want us to be involved in helping people in their humanitarian needs, but not at the cost of the gospel. The gospel is central to our ministry and our mission. I met someone, I was in a church speaking in the morning. It was a large church in New York. And they announced that in the evening we're going to hear a report from Afghanistan. So I was so anxious because it was just after those 3 girls who were arrested, arrested, and they were kidnapped, and finally they were released. Heather Mercer and her friend, I forgot her name now, Heather came to this room here and testified about her story after she was released. And I had something to do with her release, including prayer for her. Anyway, right after that, I was so interested. What is God doing in Afghanistan? So this medical doctor stood up and spent a whole hour speaking, and not one of his words included any of these: gospel, Bible study, church, Jesus. It was all talking about medicine. It was talking about how many women needed this kind of surgery, how many fatalities, stillbirths, and how many, statistics, medical, and so on, and how much he and his organization are doing to alleviate the medical pains and struggles of this country. So at the end, I came to him and I said, you are a medical missionary, because that's how he was announced, as a medical missionary. Do you ever have opportunities to share the gospel? He said, that's not my job. I said, so what's your job? He said a beautiful sentence. He says, my calling is to express the love of Christ in practical ways. And I'm a doctor. My practical way is medicine. Expressing the love of Christ in a practical way. So I said, what is the difference between you and the French doctor with Doctors Without Borders? You know Doctors Without Borders? They're atheists. One of their leaders lives here in Boulder, and he's a professor at CU. I spent years witnessing to him. Finally, he rejected the gospel and let him go. He's a Frenchman who's teaching engineering here, but he's one of the leaders of this organization. He promotes it and raises funds for it. What's the difference between you and an atheist who goes to do medicine there? Or a Japanese Taoist pagan worshiper who comes as a doctor there? Or an Iranian Muslim who comes to Afghanistan under the disguise of medical help, because they have an organization that does medicine. And he did not know how to answer. He says, all I know is I'm obeying Christ. I said, friend, you're not obeying Christ if you don't share Christ. So our mission is really the gospel. Everything else is secondary. Primarily is the gospel. What is the use of sending a poor person to hell a little bit less poor, or even richer? Sending a sick person to hell a little healthier, or someone who was naked, now he's going to hell with clothes on. Our calling is to save souls from hell. Jude says, as though we're snatching them out of the fire. So we are basically a fire brigade. We know there's a building on fire. We're going to put on the armor of God, and we're going to go out there with our helmets and our shields and our belts and all that stuff, and we're going to go and save them from that fire of hell, from the captivity to Satan, to sin, to darkness, to lostness, to deception. So brothers and sisters, let's not lose sight of our calling. Let's live a life worthy of our calling. And there's nothing more worthy than preaching Jesus who is the only hope. He is the only life for those who are dying in sin and going to hell. Say amen.
Amen.
Thank you.